Okay, so I'm here with Ahead of the Curve, also known as James Bergman, and today we're going to discuss why you should be a vegan. I'm Eric Evans from Conscious Philosophy, and I make videos on Christianity, theology, politics will be coming up, and yeah, just really philosophy in general. So, James, if you want to hand it over to you.
Yeah. I'm James Bergman, also known as Ahead of the Curve. A bit of branding there. um, yeah, so I guess, I'm a writer of some sort. I dabble in philosophy quite a bit. Theology is really interesting to me as well. I'm psychology student, but I'm sure some people know who I am, as I know, Eric, of course. So yeah, that's my introduction. Shall I go ahead with why I'm vegan, and then we can go
Yeah, I think that's a
to
good
you,
segue
perhaps?
into the discussion. So, yeah, why are you a vegan?
Well, a lot of people ask me that question, and they sort of expect the answer to
Elevator
be, well,
pitch.
I care about the animals, and
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And it's not that I don't. It's more my reasons for veganism are actually not really that predominantly. I mean, that's just a sort of byproduct of it, such as it also supporting the reduction of climate change and so on. It's more of a byproduct for me, at least, because the reason why I became a vegan was simply not only as a challenge, I guess, but also as a philosophical position, right? Because I watched people like Cosmic Skeptic, Joey Carbstrong, and I was against veganism, as I've said before, and I was I was militantly against it. I was like, well, I had all these arguments, and then when I actually looked into it, when I read Peter Singer's book, um, Animal Rights, I believe it is. I can't remember what it is now,
Mhm.
but and other sort of online videos, Cosmic Skeptics videos, for example. I then began to I realized that my arguments actually weren't very good at all. And what I found was that it's actually a really interesting philosophical argument. It's a really interesting topic, philosophically speaking, the whole ethics arena. And so my reasons were just philosophical consistency.
Mhm.
So I realized, well, would I eat a dog? Well, no, because I have a dog and I don't really fancy eating one. And then I was like, well, why do I eat a chicken? Why do I eat a cow? And it's like, well, because I guess I have this personal preference not to. Um, and the question then was, well, why do you make exceptions for different animals? And my answer to that to myself was, I don't know. I guess cows taste nice. Chicken tastes nice with a bit of hot sauce, and so I realized that I was not really thinking through my position, or to be honest, most meat eaters don't actually believe it is a position. They just eat meat,
Mhm.
right? Because we
Yeah.
just we just are brought up with it, which fair
Mhm.
enough to that. Um, but I was starting to question this more deeply. Like, what are my actual reasons, and how can I justify this from a rational point of view? And I was thinking, well, I guess I can't really. I guess it's just this preference I've never really thought about. So I was like, well, why don't I try veganism? Why don't I try get good at cooking and making dishes, and sort of just challenging myself as well. I've been vegan for nearly a year now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of my perspective has changed in a sense, and it's still changing as well. But we'll probably go into that. But yeah, at this point, I feel like, for example, I will never go back to drinking cow's milk. I just don't see any reason whatsoever.
To do that. Yeah.
Because maybe I could say hypothetically fish, perhaps, because I quite like fish. But when it comes to milk, it's oat milk. Like it's just no difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, apart from this sort of maybe long introduction,
It's
my
good.
reasons for veganism are based in philosophy. It's
Yeah.
philosophical consistency. It's ethics. Animals can feel pain. Mammals, for example, fish. It's a myth that fish don't have good memories. It's a myth that they can't feel pain, and so on. There are so many caricatures out there that aren't well thought through. And I was the host of many of those ideas before I actually looked into it, and I was like, well, I just either I continue doing something that I think is wrong by looking at the philosophical arguments, that is, or I just admit, that maybe I should try and do something different. Maybe I should just admit that there is something going on here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. What's your response to that? And like, why are you not a vegan, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a great response. I mean, for me personally, I do see a lot of moral confusion when it comes to animals. You mentioned about, did you say you have a dog?
I have a dog, yeah.
So you have a dog, right? So intuitively, you would never eat your dog, of course, right? But you probably wouldn't eat dogs in general. You know what I mean? Because you have some kind of, we have like a, here in the West, like a companionship with them. We consider them our companions. But when we look at cows, pigs, and other animals or mammals rather, our intuitions are just deeply confused. Because what's the difference, right? If you had a cow as a pet or a pig, well, you probably say, of course, you're not going to eat my pig or my cow, and you would treat it as, one of your own. So
a pig is more. I mean, also we can go into this, but the question of why we eat particular animals over others is actually a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
But I will briefly say that if we're doing it based on intelligence and conscious ability, why are we eating pigs? Because they're much more intelligent than dogs. Or
they're very intelligent. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so the answer to that is, well, I don't know. I guess they're not aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
Sure, you can make that claim, but is an animal's aesthetic appearance enough to justify murdering it to eat in a 3-minute meal? So
I think we also have like a propensity towards cuteness, right? Like, oh my god, it's so cute, I would never do that, versus other animals where we don't really think about that. You know what I mean? But just kind of going back to me, I kind of came from the same position as you. I have really studied the arguments. I took a few animal ethics classes in college, and it really becomes convincing that this is wrong. It's certainly morally wrong, I think. Now, I just think for me, I haven't made that step yet, but I'm aware of this, and I do think it is morally wrong. I mean, when the arguments are, flushed out, like we're going to get to in a moment, it just becomes pretty clear that using animals as property and to fulfill our taste buds is wrong when there's another alternative to that. So that's kind of my position in a nutshell. Yeah. So do you have anything else to add to that, or?
No, because I think that you have looked into it, obviously, and there is something going on here, which is
right.
The headline. There is something going on here that we need to sort of think about more.
Yeah,
because it's just been pushed under the rug for so long, and proper discussions have been subdued. Because I mean, let's be honest, vegans don't have the best PR. Okay, so most of them are very fundamental, I suppose, which that's another discussion. But basically, they don't have good appearance, I suppose, on the news and so on.
Yeah.
So I mean, look, that is a good reason to maybe not listen to them. But just because somebody's appearance in how they speak, their oration being how you don't like it, that doesn't mean the message isn't true. And I try and do that all the time. I'm listening to many sort of debaters. I don't really like them as a person. I don't think that they're maybe as ingenuous as they could be. But I'm like, okay, well, sure.
Yeah.
But what about the argument? How good?
Right. You have to put aside emotion, and a lot of times emotion drives everything in us. So we have to try to shed that completely, or if completely try to eradicate that in certain circumstances. I think emotion is important to some degree. I mean, we feel emotional about animals being slaughtered. I mean, you certainly do. You're a vegan, so emotion is important, but you don't want it to propel all of your intuitions and your rationality, right? So you're right about that. We want to look at the merits of the argument, whether it stands or falls, and that's kind of how we judge it. So judge if the argument's sound or not, if it's persuasive. So I do want to go into a quote from Gary Francione. He's my professor. Well, he was my professor at Rutgers. He wrote this book called Animal Rights, Your Child or the Dog. So I think this can segue into further discussion. So it'll take a couple minutes, but so he says, there is a profound disparity between what we say we believe about animals and how we actually treat them. On one hand, we claim to take animal interests seriously. 2/3 of Americans polled by the Associated Press agree with the following statement: an animal's right to live free of suffering should be just as important as a person's right to live free of suffering. More than 50% of Americans believe that it is wrong to kill animals to make fur coats or hunt them for sport. Almost 50% regard animals to be just like humans in all important ways. Over 50% live with cats or dogs, and approximately 90% of those people regard their pets as members of their families and would risk injury or death to save the life of their pet. Americans spend approximately $7 billion annually on veterinary care for their dogs and cats, and over $20 billion on food and accessories for those and other pets. These attitudes are reflected in other nations as well. For example, 94% of Britons and 88% of Spaniards think that animals should be protected from acts of cruelty, and only 14% of Europeans support the use of genetic engineering that results in animal suffering, even if the purpose is to create drugs that would save human lives. So I know that was a mouthful, but basically what I'm trying to elucidate there, or rather what Francione's trying to elucidate, is that our moral intuitions are total, and our moral grammar as well, are just totally confused. As I think that passage elucidates. I don't know if you want to add anything on to that.
No, I mean, I think that accumulated quite a lot of controversies and ideas that people intuitively agree with, because like that was alluding to, if you were to ask somebody on the street whether they agree with animal abuse, they say, of course not.
Yeah.
What do you take me for? But then they
Right.
go to a restaurant that very evening and dice into a steak. I mean, look, it's this sort of double standard that I think is propelled by the societal ignorance. And I know I'm not saying people are willfully ignorant, although it can be the case, but it is mostly the case that it's simply not just talked about. And this entire point of veganism, as of late anyway, recently, I suppose, is that we just need to talk more about it.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. You're right. It's not really talked about. And again, for example, I'm in a David Bentley Hart fan group, and I posted a question about a month ago about animals. Is it right to eat animals if they're sentient, they have an interest in living? And some of the comments were just baffling. I mean, people said, it was like they said, burger good, me eat burger. It was just so, it was so primitive. And they said, well, what do you mean? Animals are tasty. They're just animals. Like, this just presses even further that even really intelligent people just have not even thought about this. They just haven't even thought about it, And
we're animals. We're
right,
animals. We
right,
don't
that's
each
true.
other, although Hannibal does, but he has his reasons.
Yeah, and I mean, prior to the 19th century, animals were just seen as things. They really didn't have, they were certainly outside the moral community, and they are to a great degree today as well. But another odd thing is we have laws that protect animals from being beaten and tortured. If I was torturing dogs in my basement right now, I could get arrested, face legal charges for that. So it's just, again, a lot of moral confusion, or as my professor called it, moral schizophrenia. Yeah, I mean, it's that bad, so.
We don't know that we're not doing it or doing
Right, exactly. So yeah, I did want to add one more point too. My professor, he was on an interview with CNN or Fox, and it was about the Michael Vick case. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Yeah, so he was a football player for the Eagles, and they invited him on to talk about that, because he's an animal rights activist.
Right.
And he was basically having dog fights. And he just said right there, flat out, I'm not going to comment on that, while half the country is sticking their forks into meat right now as they watch that. And they're saying, oh my God, how wrong is that Michael Vick had dogs fighting? But while they're eating their steak and chicken, you know what I mean?
I think I know why they were so outraged.
Yeah.
It's because again, there's this illusion that it's handled ethically. How many times do we see free range? How many times do we see happy animals on adverts? But the truth is, it's beyond words. It's only visually, you can only visually perceive it, because no words will suffice for what actually happens as opposed to what we're told happens. And that is the thing. It's this sheet of sort of one-sided glass that, and we only see one side of the picture, right?
Yeah.
For example, free-range chickens. Chickens need a lot more space to live healthily and so on than what they actually give them. And not to mention their lifespan is cut short by, years and years and years, because obviously it costs money to keep them. So there has to come a point where you keep them for the least amount of time, but grow them to the best size. And that's where artificial technologies come in and to enhance them. But that's sort of sidetracking there. But yeah, basically, the reason why they are so in shock, in horror, is because they are convinced, utterly convinced, that the animal that they are eating was treated humanely. Tell me, Eric, how do you think you can humanely kill someone or an animal? It's a really interesting question.
It is a very interesting question. And I find that a lot with people who, not only eat animals, but have, again, never thought about this. They just say, well, yeah, I can see that that's wrong when they're in the factories and they're being tortured. But if they can be killed humanely, that's fine. Then it's okay. And my response to that is really, there's no difference. You are still eliminating their potential future experiences. You're eliminating them. You're killing them, right? You're killing the animal. You could read them a bedtime story and tuck them in and, inject them with poison, and they peacefully, fall asleep. But there's really no difference there. You're still ending the sentient creature's existence, right? So that would be my response to that argument. I don't really know if it is an argument, but
yeah, well, people act as if it is.
Right.
Well, I think the thing that has to be discussed inevitably is, well, how do we define humane murder? Because to me, it's an oxymoron.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Really. It is terms. Some would, for example, I believe there is a baking company in the UK, and they, on their sort of packaging, I think on their website, actually, they said animals are humanely killed, right? And then when you actually look at how they're killed, not only do you have to research a few definitions because they try and hide behind long fancy words, but basically they are gassed to death, the pigs.
Yeah.
And there are videos of gassing pigs.
I've seen them.
Other animals, and they, the pigs make an awful shriek, almost human-like.
It's like blood curdling.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's.
I saw I saw a couple of videos of the boiling water, and it's just it's really intense, for sure.
Yeah. The UK, for example, they are having new laws recently. For example, I believe one of them is, among many, actually, which is great. You can't boil an animal alive. So that goes for fish, for example, and right. that's a that's a step forward as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, I guess where we could go next is, like, what do you think about animal rights, though? Do animals deserve rights, and what would those rights look like? What do you think about that?
Well, as I'm known to do, I refer to the Hitch. Not that he is a nice. Particular authority on the subject, but he did write an article, which you can find in his book, arguably, his selection of sort of a big book on selections of essays. But what he said there, I remember, or it came to my mind, which is they can't choose their rights. So that leaves us the responsibility to put those rights upon them.
I just want to interject real quick that, that could be analogous to babies as well. Babies can't necessarily choose their rights. They're helpless. You know what I mean? Others have to protect them. So
precisely. That's a really good analogy. Very, very important. Because it brings it even closer to home.
Yeah, it does.
Infants, human infants. Yeah, I think there has to be. And then the question is, well, how do you suppose which rights and what eligibilities they have? And what I'd say, well, it's fairly simple to some extent. Reduce as much suffering as possible. I mean, for example, like where is the necessity to take away an animal's well-being and entire life memories, which they do have memories, by the way.
Yes.
There's a lot of myths about this. But what we have to remember is, regardless of everything else, we are murdering another life form to tuck in to their meat for a few minutes.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah.
Now, look, I can understand that taste pleasure is, I guess, important, but I wouldn't say that that is more important than. Well, I don't think taste pleasure is. I don't think that that is more valuable than an animal's actual life, right?
Right. Yeah. You have to weigh the. I mean,
exactly. When you weigh it together, it's like,
yeah.
I mean, sure, I not that I didn't like meat. I loved meat. I love fish, but it's not that I don't like that stuff, because a lot of vegans actually are vegan because they brought up with it, or they don't like meat. But I actually enjoy it if I was to eat it. But the question is, what is just more valuable here? Like a meal that you could easily substitute for something just as nice, if not better, if you just learn how to cook like you would have learned in the past to cook meat. I mean, it's not as if veganism is harder to cook or anything. It's just people aren't equipped to cook vegan stuff because we've all grown up being meat eaters, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's really just this equivocation of understanding what's at stake here, not to follow the pun, right?
Yeah. And I agree. I think that I look at rights as a protection of interest. So we have interest in not being used as property or things. And animals have that same interest as well. They have the capacity to suffer, and they have an interest in future experiences. So when you look at it like that, it does seem like we can ascribe rights to animals in that one fundamental way, not to be used as property or or things, right? Of course, what other rights would we extend to animals besides that? Animals don't have the right to vote. They can't vote. They can't own homes. So it seems like there's only one fundamental right that we should extend to them and make them a part of the moral community, because they're not a part of the moral community for the most part. So we have to really focus on their interest and protect that interest that they have. That's kind of how I look at rights as protections of interest. So I think that's helpful.
Yes, innate sort of interests within their well-being, or a priori well-being,
exactly,
what they are as an animal.
Yeah, and all of us are different. I mean, even if you have identical twins, they're not going to have the same outcome, right? We all have different intellectual capacities. Some of us go to university, some of us go into trades. So we're not equal in that respect, but we are equal in one fundamental way, again, not to be used as property or things. And can we extend that to animals? Is there a case for that? Is there a sound case for that? And I think there is. Yeah. So.
And just because it's difficult as well doesn't mean that it's that we shouldn't do it. I mean, a lot of people would say, oh well, it's a lot of effort ascribing rights, and even cooking vegan food. I'd have to learn how to cook some other products. Well, it's like okay, look, practically speaking, I get what you mean, but that lasts for like a week. I got a recipe book. Okay, it was that simple. I just got a recipe book, and it was the most fun I've had cooking, because it was being so adventurous with flavor and avoiding animal products. So for me, it was a challenge and an interest to me. Yeah.
No, yeah, I agree with that, and I forget what I was going to say. What did you just say?
So it was just about how preparing the
right. So that's what I was going to say too. You mentioned this is really difficult. This is going to take a lot of work. I can't imagine not eating wings or bacon and whatnot. But the same argument can be used in terms of slavery as well. Slavery was perfectly fine up until the 19th century, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's the oldest institution, slavery. That was okay. And okay, anyway, yeah, so that was perfectly okay. And, there were plenty of people, slaveholders, that I'm sure said, this is going to be so hard. How I can't have people be my slaves anymore. How can this be? But we have to weigh, we have to look at both sides here and say, can you do this on your own or hire people in an appropriate fashion, or continue to use people's farm equipment? What's the better alternative? And I think that's easy to, decide.
Another great analogy, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, sorry about that, man. I don't know what happened there. Okay, so let's see here, man. Where do you want to go next? Do you have anything you want to usher into discussion? Or?
Well, I mean, there were the few points that you sent over that we both agree would be quite interesting to discuss.
Right. Okay. If you want to go into any of those.
Although, yeah, I mean, I want to dive deeper into you personally. So what is it, if you sort of think about it, like, what is it, if you could put your finger on it, is the reason why you just haven't made that step? Like, are there any sort of reservations about any arguments?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Is there anything along those lines?
I really think that it's just, again, I think it's just something I understand. I mean, we talk about this all the time, my family and I. We say, oh, we just looked at these arguments and we talked about it, but we got to stop eventually. And it's kind of just like that. There's really, I do understand that it's wrong. I guess it's just so available. And I'm so used to it. You go to a hockey game or something, and there's wings there and all kinds of stuff. And you really don't even think about it. But then afterwards I'll say, hey, this is probably, well, I think it is wrong. But it's kind of like a moral procrastination, if that makes sense. I just
put it. I like that.
Yeah, like a moral procrastination. I just say, I'll stop one day. I got to stop. This isn't cool.
Yeah, but like the smoker, he's given up 100 different times.
That's, what? That's a perfect example or a perfect analogy. That's kind of what it is for me. So, yeah.
I don't know how it is in the US. I know in the UK that there are great companies that produce vegan products that are quite reasonably priced. But I don't know in the US. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it seems like it would be a bit different depending on the states. So some states might have vegan companies that they have in markets and so on. But I mean, the question has to be also like, what's the availability of these non-animal products, right? Because look, of course, and I said this before, there are so many lovely meals without animal products that we eat all the time that we don't think about. But maybe you just want substitute mince. Maybe you just want substitute sausage. Maybe you just want a substitute steak, for example, or maybe a substitute fried chicken. All of the above is available in the UK. You can buy it at supermarkets, you can go to London, and London's great for vegan stuff. There are so many restaurants, but I don't know about the US. Something tells me it just isn't as good.
Yeah, I don't think it's as prevalent. There are certainly, places to get food, vegan food, but I don't think it's as prevalent as it is in London. Maybe I'm just ignorant on that, but yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, for me, for example, I was sticking with the substitute stuff because, obviously I was so used to having bolognese with the mince, or sausages, for example. There is substitute fish as well. So I was like, yeah, well, to help me going along, I'll and there's nothing wrong with that anyway. I mean, yeah, I'll just have the replacement sort of meat or whatever it might be called, substitute, I suppose. And I still eat some of those today, but obviously they can be more expensive than the actual thing itself. And that's only because of supply and demand.
Right,
that's only because we sort of need more people to buy it. And that's fair enough as far as I'm concerned. But to the people who say that veganism is expensive,
I was going to say that's I hear that a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me just make this clear for anyone who's still thinking about this, because I mean it's a really valid point. I mean, to some extent, but it depends on what you buy, and it depends as well if you're a meat eater. Like if you buy steaks every single day, a steak is quite a bit of money. So
Mhm.
if you buy a steak every single day, you're going to be spending a lot. As a vegan, if you spend your money on, let's say, I don't know what's expensive, the top end Beyond Meat burger, which is great, but it's really expensive.
Yeah.
If you do that, you will lose money. But the thing that I want to point out, and then I do point out, is it just depends on what you buy. Like you can spend the same amount of money as a meat eater as you can a vegan. It just depends on the product that you get. And yeah, if you really want to, you can be cheap. If you want to spend money, then you
Yeah.
can. I mean, it's
And
the same thing.
and again, I can't help but go back to what you and I have been talking about this moral consideration. Well, what matters more, even if it was a little bit more expensive, paying that or continuing in the slaughter of animals?
Yes.
What deserves more weight here? That's the question.
Yeah,
And
I totally empathize with that because
yeah, right.
because I was sort of see what you said there is a really good ethical consideration. Although the reason why I take it a bit of a step a step behind, I guess, is because I'm sort of assuming that people might not be able to buy more expensive stuff because people can't. I mean, that is just
Yeah.
the nature of many people, that they have to be a bit more careful.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that they say is, well, I can't afford it. Right.
Yeah.
Because, like if you're in poverty, right? And I would understand someone if they said this to me. I would understand if you said, look, where I live, the products are just outright double the price. And I'd probably say to that, look, fair enough, I guess, because if there is no way, if you're being truthful and saying there's no way for you to eat cheaper, then look, your well-being, I agree. You should not starve yourself to death. But when you can, that's another question. Because then, Eric, it becomes the moral question. If you can,
I
then are
agree.
you not compelled to?
Right. I agree. I mean, if you're starving, I certainly don't
Yeah.
think I would say, okay, do not, you can't kill that pig. I mean, just die. But maybe there's people that would, I don't know, maybe people could try to object to that and say, well, that's a shame that you're starving. You don't get to take the life away of a pig. I mean, what do you think about that? Does that strike you as kind of extreme?
You know, you know, something I've said before is I don't believe animals are of the same worth as humans, but I don't think that gives us an excuse to eat them and to
Yeah,
abuse
that's
them.
right.
That's a fundamental point because people are like, oh,
Yeah.
well, you value animals more than humans. It's like, okay, even if I did, let's just back up here. Like,
Right.
why does that matter? Why does that matter at all?
What?
Like,
Yeah.
it's such a red herring, I find.
Yeah. I find that too. And like we talked about earlier, we're just really talking about extending one fundamental right, the right not to be treated as property or things, and not to impose gratuitous suffering upon animals where there's other routes we can take where we don't have to do that. So, but that reminds me of the classic example. There's a burning building. Who would you save? Would you save the cow or the child? So I mean, who would you save? Just to ask you.
Yeah, I mean, I deal with a lot of hypotheticals on the podcast, the Bastard Science Universe that I'm on.
Yeah.
But they're obviously, if you watch it, a lot more grotesque than that. And to answer that question, I'm not. My first instinct would be the child because, as I said, I don't think an animal is necessarily worth more than a human. It's
Yeah.
just if I can prevent both of them from burning, I would. But if I had to choose
Yeah.
at this very point, the child, because the child is, as far as my estimation goes and my values go, the child has much more of a opportunity for life, and then much more sentient, for example.
Right.
So this isn't a case of either or. It's like it depends on the context, right?
And you could
What's your
look at
thoughts?
the parents of the child, that they
Hmm.
would almost certainly suffer to a higher degree than the cow's parents, Right. So,
Yeah.
I do agree with that. I do. And that reminds me of Norcross. Have you ever heard of Norcross?
No.
He kind of says, well, he has an article about, I think it's called Fred's Puppies. Have you ever heard of this? It's pretty profound.
I don't know. I don't
It's
know.
pretty profound. It's
Okay.
just in a nutshell. Fred gets in a car accident, right? And his Godiva gland is damaged, the gland that secretes chocolate. So he can no longer taste chocolate anymore.
Okay.
So Fred goes to the doctor and he says, "Hey, doc, I can't taste chocolate anymore. What do I do? How do I get back my taste for chocolate?" And the doctor says, "Well, there's these puppies. You puppies have the Godiva gland in them." And Fred goes, "Okay." So Fred sets up a basement, or he sets up like a torture chamber in his basement, and he has these puppies down here. And every day he kills them for that, for their Godiva gland, so he can taste chocolate again. Obviously, intuitively there'd be moral outrage about that, and I think Norcross goes into something else too. You were mentioning how human beings are worth more than animals, right? So he kind of mentions that if you are, I mean, we can kind of segue into experimenting on animals as well. But he says if you were to experiment on animals, you have to be willing to experiment on certain human beings as well. So maybe human beings in vegetative states. We could argue that a human in a vegetative state is not worth as much as, say, a golden retriever or a cow or a pig. And I think that's an interesting point.
Oh
So
yeah.
I know that the basement example was a little off topic, but that's kind of, he mentions that in that article. So I wanted to just, announce that.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And unpack
it's
the whole thing. Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, I'm totally behind what you said there. I mean, about as well with sort of equivocating the animals in their own state, and a human, let's say, who's mentally deficient in some way. Um, if to be morally consistent, and this is what you were getting to be morally consistent,
Mm.
you would have to agree that exploiting somebody who's mentally deficient is morally consistent with doing that if you do it with an animal as well, by their own
Yeah.
standards anyway.
To an animal that's functioning properly as well.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with the animal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll
And
send you Norcross some of his work. He's really good. Yeah, I think you would like him a lot. But when you
please
said
do.
it, yeah, when you
Yeah.
said that you think humans are worth more than animals, that just immediately made me think about that. But did you want to expand on any of the rest? Or
I want to point out something about hypotheticals as a general rule that I found. Well, not a rule, but more of something that I've picked up. Politicians, for example, get a lot of questions, right? And they have a lot of responsibilities, and as many as much as they get criticized for not answering questions, I think we have to give them more leeway in the sense of that they are complex, and those hypotheticals, not that I'm opposed to them, but in context to them being proposed to somebody who's answering a contentious question, I have found from experience that it is just to box people, right? To put people in a box.
yeah,
And what I don't like, and this is sort of a side point, I guess, on hypotheticals and my sort of take on them, I guess, is that, yeah, it's just boxing people in. Like, it's when people ask Jordan Peterson, does he believe in God? As much as
I thought of that right away when you said box people in. Yeah,
as much as I am not on board with how he approaches the concept of God, and how vague he is, I think he's got a point.
yeah,
because these are loaded questions. It assumes a lot, and with hypotheticals, it boxes you into one or the other condition, and then when you go outside of that condition and elaborate, people are like, oh well, you're just making excuses, or you're avoiding the question. But the point I want to bring up about hypotheticals specifically is we need to open dialogue like me and you are having, where we don't just accept the black or white answer. We have to sort of look deeper into what that implies, or what the situation implies, because people might be listening to me and saying, oh well, you changed the question around, and that, you can accuse me of that, but I think the realization has to occur on the other side of the coin, that the question itself is loaded a lot of the time anyway.
And just real quick, what exact question do you think is loaded? Which one in
Well,
particular?
it's the dichotomous sort of questions, such as would you do this or that?
Yeah, right.
And that's why I brought up politicians.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. And it's the burning building thing. Like, as much as I think hypotheticals are good to derive examples and to sort of like to get a point across about a metaphorical concept, I am very iffy with them. About very contentious issues anyway, because
I can
they can they can sort of get the impression, at least, or people get the impression that somebody's dodging the question. But it's more of a side point that I found out.
I think that's interesting. I mean, I certainly think that hypotheticals are good, analogies are good, but we shouldn't stop at hypotheticals, of course. Like, would you save the child or the cow? Oh, the child. Okay, there's more that we would need to talk about.
And if it was a politician saying that, and just to bring that example back,
sure,
if it was a politician saying that, the cameras were shut off instantly, and they would have the headline.
Yeah.
This is the issue.
Yeah,
context is so important. Ian McGilchrist, in his The Master and His Emissary, one of the best books I've ever read. Please read it, anyone who's listening who hasn't read it already. But he says, as he's found out in his entire career of philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, context is the most important possible thing in discussions, because in these hypotheticals as well, and also the questions I've also addressed, such as isn't veganism more expensive? Context. It
always matters.
You have to look, and
yeah.
The problem with context is that you inevitably have to look deeper into the question. And who wants to do that, eh? Who wants to do that, I guess? Christopher Hitchens didn't want to do that. Sam Harris didn't want to do that. Dawkins didn't want to do that,
Yeah.
Like just a reference to our previous discussion. But it's like, we can't just push these things under the rug because they're difficult questions.
And then people will turn around and say, oh, the context card that you're bringing up, context matters, but it does matter.
Yeah.
This could be shelved for another discussion, but just certain biblical passages within the Old Testament.
Yes.
They'll just read this line and say, oh, see,
yes,
wow, this is horrible. But they haven't read anything else. They haven't thought about the ancient, Near Eastern context or anything like that. But that's for another discussion.
Yes.
I'm just looking at some of my notes here, James. Where do you want to go next? Do you have anything that you would particularly want to talk about? Any arguments, maybe?
Well, admittedly, there's quite a lot. Okay, so there are quite a lot.
Oh, so, I actually have one. If you don't, do you have one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've got some at the ready, but you go ahead.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I did want to ask you about population control, right? So I hear this argument a lot.
Yeah.
So people will say, and I talk with my dad a lot about this, and my dad's been reading Peter Singer, actually. And he just said, wow, I never thought about this, man. And a lot of times they think that's what it takes to just start thinking about it, start talking about it. What was I going to say? Just flew out of my mind.
about the population control.
Oh, right. Population control. So my dad has raised this and various other people. Well, if you don't kill deer, like if you didn't have hunters, they would just be all over the place. You'd be hitting them on highways and whatnot. What do you think about that?
Well, there is a thing called nature.
Right.
And nature is a self-cleansing thing, right? And it's often the hunters really who sort of control it manually, and in some sense can destroy it, because if we look, even if there are cars, right, look, animals will die. And again, this isn't black and white. This isn't about saving every single animal. This is about reducing animal suffering. There's a common misconception of veganism. Well, my position is anyway, and I know this is a contentious issue, but to me, veganism is minimizing, not with the blanket sort of approach. Oh, you have to stop all animal suffering. It's like, I would want to do that, but I'm being realistic. It's about reducing. It's about doing what you can. And this leads on to another point that I'm not completely Sure. I mean, we can go into that because that's a different topic, but it is a really interesting view of veganism that I haven't really read much about, but it's been on my
Yeah, neither have
mind.
I. Yeah. I mean, I'm not really too extremely versed on veganism in general, but I do know
Right.
some things about it. But that is something I've always, yeah, I mean, to me, the best answer I can provide just from my limited understanding of this is really just that doesn't give us the right to murder them. Maybe there's some other way, whatever that way might be.
Yeah.
But
And this reminds me, again, this reminds me of the problem of evil because, you know, if I was being the devil's advocate to you, Eric, I could say, well, oh well, that's just a cop out. But in the same sense though of, well, God works in mysterious ways. Look, that is a comedic sort of um point that atheists, and I'm, as people might know who know me, I'm an agnostic atheist at the moment, but I am struggling with this concept of how much do we give credence to how much we don't know about God,
yeah,
right? And not to get off topic, but I think this is maybe equivocal because look, just because we don't have all the answers under the sun doesn't mean that overall there is a bigger picture to be seen. And I think, Eric, you would personally make that claim about, or share that sentiment about Christianity.
yeah, I do share that. I think that there is, again, we have epistemological limitations. I think we can know some things,
Hmm.
but I think that there's a lot that we do not know.
Hmm.
We're not omniscient. So that's what I would say to that.
Yeah. Did you want to build more on that point, or do we want to sort of go to another?
I think it's all right. We can move on if you want.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So let me just look at one. Veganism isn't healthy.
Oh, that's actually a
So,
good one. Yeah, I'd be curious what you think about that. Yeah.
so could
That's
I
a
could
good
I
one.
have your perspective first, just to switch
Um,
it up?
yeah, I mean, from all the things I've read and spoken with my professor who's been a vegan for 40 plus years, there doesn't seem to be any severe health concerns. Um, I've spoken to a lot of vegans myself, aside from my professor, and they are perfectly healthy. Sometimes eating meat can actually be worse for you. So that's would be my response to that. But what would you say?
Yeah, I mean the same sort of, there is more to build on this, but I must reinforce what I said before, to this sort of inquiry. It depends on what you eat. Like if
Yeah,
you are
yeah,
eating vegan chocolate all day long,
yeah.
that isn't good
Right.
for you, right?
Yeah.
That isn't good. Um, in the same sense,
Eating McDonald's hamburgers.
like exactly. So
Yeah.
it just depends on what you eat, really and truly. I mean, look, there are, for people who say, Cody from the podcast, Cody Sexton, he has I'm going to forget what the disorders are called, but basically he has to have meat in his diet. He can't just have he can't just have sort of animal products, sorry, non-animal products. So he has to
Okay.
have it. And look, to him, I say, look, I don't blame you because what are you supposed to do? And this inquiry is made. It's like, well, what are you going to do with all the people who can't have meat, like Jordan Peterson, who have to have meat? Sorry, like Jordan Peterson, like the carnivore diets. And it's like,
Hmm.
this is just redundant because
Yeah,
you
that's
already
true.
know my answer. You're just asking. You're just asking my answer for no good reason, because the question to that is, it is what it is. Like if you can't change your internal conditions, your
Yeah.
predispositions, then like that is just what it is. But if you can, and this is what we both have been saying, if you
Reducing.
can,
Yeah.
that gives you the inclination.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I mean, it seems on your behalf, some of these points are just redundant. Like you said, you just want to reduce the amount of suffering. We're not going to
Yes.
obviously eliminate everything.
Yes.
We're not going to say, oh well, Jordan Peterson does it. So
Yeah.
it's about that net suffering. We're reducing that, kind of like a utilitarian perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, let's say so
Yeah.
a little bit.
I
Yeah.
just finished Mill's Utilitarianism
Oh,
book.
nice.
It's quite definitely dense, but it was very interesting in parts. And utilitarianism is obviously its own subject, but when I'm asked my position on sort of moral, ethics, sort of
Mhm.
principles, I just reply a mix of whatever there is, I guess. I mean, why do we have to be a utilitarian? Why do we have to
Yeah.
only apply the morals of God? Why do we only have to be this or that? I apply, like, for example, I think that it's really great to learn from history. So if we've learned from history that people preferably wouldn't want war upon them, then maybe it's a good idea not to have war. But of course, there are contexts where war might be feasible and so on and so on. But
Yeah.
for most people, it is not. So, and that's sort of a utilitarian point. But my idea is we just need to look at what has worked in the past and just think it through, I guess, and just use many disciplines together and try and come to a reasonable conclusion. And then you might ask, well, what's reasonable? And I'd say, well,
Yeah.
what works, I suppose. What works for the for what people would agree works, I suppose. A consensus, a democracy. That's what I'm for. Although democracy, I do come back to Socrates' point of democracy. Would you get the floor cleaner or scrubber? Would you get the sale guy? I don't know all the names. Sorry for anyone who knows about this. Would you get all the people who know how to clean the barrels? Would you know all the people? Would you get all the people who know how to scrub the floors? Would you get all the
Yeah.
people who know to turn the sails? Would you get those guys to sail the ship instead of the captain? And that's a really, really interesting question because I agree. Like, get the captain to do what he knows how to do, right? And so the problem with democracy, and this is again, it's relevant, but it's also a side note. The problem with democracy is that there are going to be people who just don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Well, yeah, there's going to be slackers too of all kinds of
Yeah,
sorts,
of course.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally. I get that point. Um, let's see here. Um, just looking at some of my notes that I put here. This is kind of, I mean, it's still relevant, but Descartes, are you familiar with what he did to animals?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. I mean, I when I first read that, it was just totally shocking to me how he really believed, he was convinced that they were robots, that they didn't have a mind, they didn't have consciousness, they couldn't feel pain, and he would, nail them up by their paws.
Yeah.
And when they would scream and in pain, he just thought it was, analogous to maybe a machine that needed more oil that was just screaming. I mean, it's just that it's really amazing how, that progressed. That thought, because we would just robots. Are you kidding me? And even Immanuel Kant, he still, he was aware that animals were sentient, but he still, again, didn't think that we had a moral obligation to them. And on his behalf, it was, because they're not rational, they don't have maybe like personhood, they can't use reason and whatnot. And then comes along Jeremy Bentham. Have you heard of him? Yeah, of course. Yeah. He was so ahead of his time, man. I mean, he was for gay rights, the right to divorce, freedom of expression, and of course, animal rights.
Can they suffer?
Exactly. It's not it's not that if they can reason, if they can talk, if they can, enjoy the luxuries that we have. There's no Keats, there's no Nietzsche's and Humes among chimpanzees or pigs, but that doesn't matter. It's if they can feel pain. Do they have the capacity to suffer? So I just think over the years, that progression is really interesting in our moral thought towards animals. And Bentham really was a revolution under his thought, a moral revolution towards how we look at animals. So
a brilliant step forwards.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. So let me see. So we have canine teeth to eat meat.
Oh, so, yeah, that's just
this is a very popular argument. And this is the appeal to nature fallacy, which I think,
nature,
Eric,
yeah,
you know all about this,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
for the audience, anyone who's unfamiliar, this is to say that because something has been permitted in the past, it is morally efficient to continue doing it or to do it in general. And so there's 2 points to this. Well, so firstly, just because we have teeth to eat animals doesn't mean that we ought to eat them. And secondly, if we actually look at our teeth nowadays, human teeth, our teeth, they actually are very flat.
Yeah,
And this is the great contradiction with anyone making this claim. Our teeth are not actually that good. They are very flat, very flat.
I just find that to be such a weak argument, though. I mean, we have the ability to be racist. Racism has always existed. We have the ability to enslave people. We can, impose cruelty upon anything. That's just irrelevant. It's whether or not should we do it or not. Is it morally impermissible? So that argument to me is just I can't see I don't think that stands up to anything.
I don't want the audience to think as well that we're sort of going for low hanging fruit, because that's not my intention. Or not.
No. It's just good to mention.
I think
it's true. People say that.
I think I can speak for you as well when I say, like you said, people actually bring these arguments to the table.
They do.
And so the accusation can be made that it's the straw man of many people's idea, but is it though? So that I just wanted to address that sort of claim, whether we're just making it too easy.
Right.
So animals eat other animals. My response to that is quite simply, animals have a very restricted diet. Like, for a lion, that they are a carnivore. Humans are multifaceted in their dietary availability, and so that is the missing point there. Eric, what's your view on that one?
About animals eat animals? Is that
yes.
I just think that's a really bad argument, because we have the ability to step outside of that primitive box and say, or rather ask the question, can these things feel pain? Can these animals feel pain? And the answer to that is yes. So we just have to step outside the box and not continue to impose that cruelty upon them. Whereas animals cannot reason like that. They are eating each other, but they're not saying to themselves, that we know of, this is wrong. I shouldn't eat this boar or whatever. You know what I mean? So just to kind of wrap up, I think just simply because we have the ability to observe this and infer from that they are sentient and they have an interest in living. So, we should not impose that upon them.
Yeah. So I don't know how much more time you want to allocate to this discussion.
We can go, because I did want to talk about one other thing. Do you have time?
So I have one thing, as you do, but the last thing on the list that the common claims, and this is a big one, so we can get to your what you want to get out, and then mine. But one other thing that I think is quite important is vegans kill plants. What is your thoughts on that? I was
just going to bring up that to you. You just stole the words out of my mouth.
Okay.
So for me, I don't think it's a strong argument, because nothing about plants tells us that they experience pain. They don't have the same neurological structure, the same physiological structure. Just an example, if I dip a piece of broccoli into boiling hot water, it is not going to try to run away from me. If I pluck a flower from the ground, it's not going to try to run away from me. If I dip a pig into boiling hot water, or if I dip you into boiling hot water, you are going to try to flee. You're going to fight or flee, right? Mm-hmm. So nothing tells us that plants feel pain at all. And I should add too, even our moral intuitions. If I were to come over to your home and eat a piece of lettuce off your counter, or I were to say, hey, James, can I eat your dog? Like, his leg looks good. I think that you would have outrage to the latter. The former, you'd say, hey, sure, you can eat that piece of lettuce. So nothing about plants tells us that they feel pain or that they have interest in living. So that would be my response to that. How would you go about that?
Yeah, because like, I've had to think a few times over about this one because look, they, and this is tricky because they have the capacity to receive chemical reactions
Yeah,
that are translated in distress, right? But this is sort of a thing that's flown around by the antis. It's like, well, that they can feel pain, and again, it's like, yeah, but what is the context behind that?
right.
Again, what is the context?
Are they
What do you mean? What
self-aware
do
of
you?
the pain?
Yes,
Are they
exactly.
actually
Yeah.
aware that I'm in pain? Do they have a subjective eye where they can, have dialogue with themselves and say, wow, this really hurts right now. Put me down. I don't know. Probably not, but
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. And that is pinpoint on the very concept. It's they have a receptor to, I guess, receive this stressful chemical reaction, but there's no manifested behavior from that they exhibit. There is no
yeah,
mammalian sort of reaction that you were going for there,
it's a
Eric.
great point. Yeah,
So I must stress this, um, not to be ironic again. Context is very, very important.
it is. Yeah. Yeah. No, I would agree. I agree that they're reactive. I agree that they react to sunlight, but to jump to the conclusion that therefore they can experience pain and they are self-aware, that's a big leap. And I think the consensus seems to repudiate that. But I mean, there are people that believe they feel pain. I spoke with Michael Jones about this. We messaged each other on Facebook, and he was bringing up studies saying, no, 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 they might feel pain. And we kind of went back and forth, but I don't have the studies in front of me to really cite any arguments. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've heard of similar things. I'm very open to anything that might be put forward
No, absolutely.
regarding
Yeah.
that issue. However, from what I've understood, those studies are misleading because they
Yeah.
are not identifying what pain is characterized by, and they're not putting it into context and comparing it to what we mean by pain when we mean pain when we
Sentient
say it.
creatures. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
exactly. I wanted to get your view, and this is something that I've been thinking about recently, and,
Mhm.
it's kind of troubling me actually, because it's leaving me with it's not a concern, but it's more of a question that I don't know how to answer. What do you think? Do you think do you think a vegan can eat meat and still call themselves a vegan in the sense of
Mm.
only just having it less or once a month? Are they still a vegan, Eric? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really think that that would be antithetical to their entire enterprise. I mean, we haven't really talked about the environmental concerns,
Hmm.
but I mean, I think it's twofold here. There is a moral concern, absolutely, and I think we've established that in this discussion.
Yes.
But there's also an environmental concern as well. And to just say, well, I'll do it sometimes, it's kind of analogous to saying, I'm not going to own slaves in these months, but when I kind of get tired from my long hours, I'm going to own them then. But I only own them a couple months out of the year. That seems wrong. That seems hypocritical. Um, Now, if you were to ask me, what do you think about me eating oysters or clams? Well, then I think you have a little bit more wiggle room there. Are clams sentient? Do they have an interest in living? I don't know. Well, as you start to get down further and further and further
Hmm.
to crustaceans, that becomes very difficult. But a lot of vegans will respond to that by saying, "Hey, everything that we know, about all mammals, they are sentient, and fish too, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree? You agree that fish are sentient, right? That seems to be the
Yes. Yes.
consensus.
It's a common myth
Yeah,
that they are
yeah.
not.
So when it gets down to crustaceans, a lot of vegans that I've spoken to just assume that they are sentient and they don't eat them. But yeah, it's a tough question. I would like to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, because the reason I bring it up is, look, maybe the title vegan is a is an unhelpful one, because when we think of vegan, it is categorically those who do not eat animal products.
That's what I was
And
going to say.
so,
Maybe like vegetarianism.
well,
Or
flexitarian is a term
oh,
that I've found. I mean,
wow, cool. I like that.
and that, yeah, I mean, and look, the thing is, Eric, is that I'm becoming much more liberal in my view of this, because in a way, I think, look, if you want to continue sort of eating this, meat, animal products, but you make the commitment to not buy cow's milk and you buy oat milk, if you make the commitment to just eat less of it, if you turn around to me and said that right now, because a year ago I would have said, well, just do it all, but right now I would say I'd find that a bit more difficult to answer, because I must say we have to commend people who just make any conscious decision to move any point forwards to just stop drinking cow's milk. I mean, that is doing something. And
I
what I
agree.
don't like about what I don't like about the veganism movement sometimes is this all or nothing idea where,
Yeah.
oh, well, if you're not fully vegan, then you're not doing anything. And it's like, as a vegan, are you also a climate activist? Are you also like interested in loads of other issues that are destroying the world? Because let's be honest here, one can be a vegan, but that doesn't mean they're doing anything on another subject.
Yeah, that's true.
And the truth is as well, people on the other subject, let's say climate activists, they say to the vegan, oh, well, eating animals is an issue, but climate change is also an issue. So then you have two people who aren't wrong, right? But they're just arguing for different points. And the question then is, well, can you be everything? And the answer to that is no. So my reasons for being more liberal right now, and this is still a trial, a thought trial, I guess, but I'm becoming much more liberal because I'm realizing that just doing something is good, and we should really, really commend people for doing that. I don't like this idea of if being a vegetarian. I mean, look, yes, you could say it's a contradiction, and morally speaking, yes, it is, but we have to be realistic about our. I don't know. This is kind of contentious. We just have to be realistic here about what we can do, because we can't do everything. So how far do we go, right?
I agree.
How far do we go?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And I'm not saying necessarily when I said it's antithetical to the vegan's ultimate enterprise, I do believe that, but I'm not saying it's, I'm not saying it's a bad thing or necessarily a hypocritical thing. If you were to, you're actively trying to stop.
Yeah.
And maybe you dabble in it here and there. I'm not going to put you down for that, but if you continue to do that, say if you just 10 years from now, you're just once in a while, you're getting steak every once in a while. I mean, I guess it kind of is, but it's still good that you're not consuming, animal products every day. But I still think that there is some hypocrisy in that.
Yeah,
but it's yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. You're good.
Yeah, because somebody who says, well, and look, to be on the opposition, the person sort of saying, oh, well, you can never do enough. To that, I would say, yes, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do something. And
totally agree.
And this is the main point. It's that how tolerant are we going? How tolerant should we be to people who are not fully fledged vegans, who just want to help out, but they don't want to commit their entire life to it? Because look, I say that it's commitment, and to some extent it is, but this is only in terms of taste pleasure, right? And so from a moral perspective, I'd say it's a contradiction, right? But from a practical perspective, we are expedient beings. We do decay and die the same as animals. The person could say, well, why don't we just make the most of things, right? And look, I think there is a slither of understanding I have for that in some sense, because remember, I don't think that animals are the same value, but I don't think that gives us an excuse to kill them and to eat them. But I do see some kind of leniency towards this sort of liberal veganism view. What do you think?
Absolutely. I do. I mean, like I said, I think any progress is good. I don't think it's all or nothing. I don't think that, again, I wouldn't scold a vegan if he said, I'm really aware of this. I'm trying to help. I care about the environment, but last night I had a couple wings from Domino's. I'm not going to just say, dude, you are such a hypocrite. You're a fraud, man. I'm not going to say that. You know what I mean? I'm just saying if it continues to progress, I mean,
yeah,
if you just continue to dabble in it here and there, I think it is analogous to that slavery point I brought up. And this is, I think it's
that was a really good point.
Yeah, and even racism, like, well, I'm not going to otherize people today, but once in a while I do. It's just, that's just odd to me. It's a little odd.
Yeah, Eric,
Yeah.
I might have to adopt that.
Yeah.
I'll put your little trademark.
Yeah, little little TM.
Yeah.
But I think it's a
really,
strong
really
point.
like
And someone could object to that again. They could just say, well, human beings and animals are different. Of course, that would be worse if we were racist towards humans and enslaved people. But then we could push back and just say, again, animals, they have an interest in living. They have an interest in not being used as things, and property. So it's tough. It's tricky, but that would be the objection back to that.
Yeah. No,
there's always distinction drawn between humans and animals.
Yes.
And they're always going to say the animal is of less value. But they justify that in the animal being used as property. Right. So you believe animals are of less value than human beings, but you don't justify them being exploited and slaughtered and used as property. So again, context matters, right? We have to talk about the context of that. Because if you say that on the face, they're going to, James isn't a vegan. But the context matters. So
yeah, for sure, because I feel like because Eric, you're a very intelligent guy. You're a very critical thinker, and I admire you greatly.
Likewise to you.
Thank you. And people on Twitter, for example, they wouldn't produce such critical thinking towards the context of all or nothing. They'd say, well, if you have to sort of meet your standards, how they black and white sort of propose themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think again, it's about normalizing this idea of doing something is great, but we also have to realize, again, the slavery example they brought up, we have to remember what the implications of that is.
Right. What are the implications of it? Yeah. Yeah, totally. So do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap it up, or?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I think we chatted for a little over an hour, man. So that's good. Yeah. All right. Well, look forward to talking again, man.
Hopefully soon, Eric. Yeah,
absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, man. Take care.
Yeah.